Shalom Chavrim, I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live, and today's broadcast is very unusual. We're going to be discussing several things in our news broadcast today that clearly are, in some people's opinions, they are conspiracy theories. In other people's opinions, these things are really real. These things are happening on the earth. But we're also going to be looking at this from a prophetic standpoint, something that I discovered recently written in the book of Enoch, a book that, well, in some circles of Christianity and in Judaism, that the book of Enoch is not part of the Bible, but yet it's clearly part of the Ethiopic scriptures. It was even part of the Qumran community, where there has been many fragments, including an incomplete scroll of the book of Enoch that was discovered. So the Jewish people did accept the book of Enoch as an authoritative biblical scripture at one time, and in many Bibles it still is there, including even the Et Sefer that Dr. Stephen Pidgeon has put out as well, where he put this book back in the Bible. So we're going to be looking at some things from there, and we're going to even be looking at some articles that have been considered well, some might say it's fake news, some might say it's satire. Regardless of the case, there may be some very truth to it, and this is why I wanted to talk to you about these things. Antarctica has really become a major subject in recent, well, in fact, in the last year, even more so. There's been every kind of conspiracy theory that it is a place for a massive alien base. This is where aliens go at. We know of the one of the former military officers, Byrd, who fought a conflict near Antarctica and lost a lot of men, claiming that there were flying discs, flying saucers coming out of the Antarctica. And just there's all kinds of evidence that is legitimate evidence that clearly seems to show that the Antarctica is certainly a base of some sort. The Germans also, under Adolf Hitler, had a base down at Antarctica. There's all kinds of things that are going on in this region of the world, and this year, or actually last year, when the election, John Kerry himself disappeared down to the Antarctica during the very day of election. But what was really strange is that when John Kerry went down there, he goes to New Zealand right afterwards, and there was a massive earthquake inside of New Zealand. I'm going to share with you, you can see some of the images here on this article here from the New York Times. They'll show you some of the images of the earthquake itself. 7.8 magnitude earthquake. The earthquake was very, very shallow, and in one article that we saw that would probably be considered satire, that they have written and stated that the reason why the earthquake happened was because John Kerry did a last-ditch effort and went down to Antarctica to try to meet with the, well, as they put it there, he was meeting with the Guardians. And the Guardians had rejected his plea to put Hillary Clinton in the White House. Instead, Donald Trump would become the next president of the United States. Now, I realize that does. It sounds so far-fetched, sounds so crazy, in fact, to even think of that. And then, of course, they said that the earthquake at New Zealand, where he went immediately after the Antarctica visit, was a warning to him not to come back again. Well, that's what they also said in the article. Those of you that remember, here is a picture here of the Patriarch Kirill. Patriarch Kirill is also the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church, who went also to Antarctica on a very unexpected trip after he met with Pope Francis in Cuba. And Pope Francis gave him a secret document. Never was revealed exactly what was in the document, but it was the first time the two leaders of the both East and Western Orthodox churches had met together to try to mend their relationship. He goes to South America afterwards, and then the unexpected trip to Antarctica. Well, the question is, why did he go to Antarctica? Well, in one article here, the Ark of Gabriel, Antarctica, Russia, and the Apocalypse, speaks about how that the Russian government had actually moved a mysterious ark that was discovered at Mecca underneath the ground there and was brought out. Many people died in the process, according to the article's claim here, and that Russia did a special movement of this art down to Antarctica. Now, again, whether we would say this is just a bunch of garbage or if it's really true or not, I'll just leave that up to you. But maybe what I'm going to share with you in a few minutes might weigh in on your thinking. So I do ask you, just kind of bear with me a little bit here while we discuss these things here. Anyway, at Mecca, if you remember, I believe it was last year, there was a quote-unquote stampede. And the news reported that some 700, in one case 717 people were killed in this stampede. This is something that has never happened before at Mecca, and actually we found out later that it was 2,000 people were killed there in Mecca. And an apparent stampede that killed all of these people. Well, not according to some of the articles there. In fact, as you can see this crane here that is toppled, that what was actually going on at Mecca was an excavation of this strange ark called the Ark of Gabriel, that according to the article here, this was something that Muhammad had said, had prophesied about. And this was buried here beneath this very place, and they were working on trying to bring it out, and some type of plasma release was done, and it caused the death of all these people. Again, is this just conspiracy theories? Is it fabricated? Who really knows? But one thing that is a fact, though, is there was a Russian ship, a scientific ship, headed to Antarctica, and that ship did stop at the port there in Saudi Arabia, supposedly to take on supplies. Well, as you know, Saudi Arabia is not necessarily the greatest friend of Russia, but they did it anyway, right? So then, after that, the ship goes to South Africa and then on to Antarctica. So they did stop and pick something up in Saudi Arabia. So maybe the article has got some truth in it after all. And then right after this ship goes to Antarctica, this is when Kirill suddenly goes down there to visit the one and only Eastern Orthodox Church at the Antarctica. So just too many strange things are happening. And a lot of people just write it off as conspiracy theories, you know, these things about aliens and you know, all this stuff going on in Antarctica. This is just a bunch of nonsense to begin with. Well, you know, I always I looked at these things and I think, wow, that's pretty interesting. I will tell you though, this article here that you're seeing now in English, this article did appear in the mainstream Russian media as well. We did a report on this back months ago, and I was trying to find the actual report I did on it. Could not find it to save my life there. But I wanted to share that with you, and if you look back, maybe you can find it yourself. But when we did the report on this, we used Russian media, mainstream Russian media, that does not look at this as being just a fabrication. They actually reported it as real news, and that yes, indeed, Russia did do a secret mission down to the Antarctica and had taken a thing called the Ark of Gabriel. So there is a Russian news source out there that does not look at this as some kind of conspiracy. And it went much deeper than what this article goes into it. We shared that with you once before. But then something caught my attention the other day. As you can see on your screen now, this is the book of Enoch. I was reading in the first book of Enoch, chapter 18. And this is where the angel Uriel is taking Enoch and showing him some very interesting things. And I want to share with you some of the words that I read here in Enoch, and then you'll see why it became very interesting to me. If we go down to say verse 4 and begin there, it says, "And I saw the winds which turned the sky and caused the disk of the sun and all the stars to set. And I saw the winds on the earth which support the clouds. And I saw the path of the angels. I saw at the end of the earth the firmament of heaven above. And I went towards the south." Okay, so he goes to the end of the earth. And he speaks about going towards the south. "And it was burning day and night, where there were 7 mountains of precious stones, and 3 towards the east and 3 towards the south." Now, I begin to think about this. He's talking about 7 mountains, but 3 go to the east and 3 go to the south. And he's talking about going towards the south. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, and he's talking about it being that it burns day and night. It was burning day and night. In other words, the sun is not setting. And I'm thinking to myself, well, the South Pole, that describes the South Pole like no other place on Earth. The sun just doesn't really ever set. It's always daylight. And so it really caught my attention. But then he mentioned about the 7 mountains. And of course, he talks about the stones, etc. But then he says, east and 3 go to the south. Well, that really got my attention. So I thought to myself, okay, is there a place down at the Antarctica that would kind of match this type of description? Well, oddly enough, there is. It's Mount Vincent. Now, you have to keep in mind what you're looking at here on your screen. You have Mount Vincent right here. It is called the Seven Summit. There are 3 going south. Now, you would say these are 3 to the west. It's actually described as southeast and southwest. But keeping in mind, when Enoch went here, the earth had not been tilted off its axis. So therefore, north and south, east and west was a bit different, right? And if you take and tilt the earth back the way it would have been, this will go just like that. And then you would have the 3 peaks, as it speaks about here, and we have the summit here, 3 peaks here. Those would go down to the south, just as he describes, and these here, the 3, would go to the east, just as he describes there. The 7 mountains, the 7 summits, and 3 to the east and 3 to the south. That really began to make sense. But the words here in Enoch get a little bit more strange, though. And as I read on, it says, and those towards the east were of colored of stone and was of pearl, and one of a healing stone, and those towards the south of a red stone. And the middle one reached to heaven like the throne of the Lord, and stibium, and the top of the throne was a sapphire. And I saw a burning fire, and what was in all the mountains. Now, keeping in mind, the middle one was the tall one. And of course, at Mount Vincent, that's exactly the way it is. Mount Vincent is the tallest mountain. Now, I can't say that this is conclusively correct. I'm putting this here before you as a conjecture, something for you to think about, just something that I find very fascinating in line with all these anomalies that are happening at Antarctica, all the weird things that are going on. John Kerry, I mean, gosh, he did more than 1 visit down to the Antarctica here. Why? What's going on? Now, when I first looked at this, I'm thinking Planet X. They're going down there because they can see Planet X coming. All right? And maybe that has something to do with it as well. But what about some other things? I'm going to share with you some very serious things also that are going on down there that have been claimed by former military officers. Okay, so just hold on for a second here. It says, and I saw a place there beyond the great earth. There the waters gathered together, and I saw a deep chasm of the earth with pillars of heavenly fire, and saw among them fiery pillars of heaven, which were falling as regards both height and depth. They were immeasurable. And beyond this chasm, I saw a place, and it had neither the sky above it, nor the foundation of earth below it, and there was no water on it, and no birds, but it was a desert place. Now, I'm sure now when you read this part here, well, that throws that out. Must have been out in Saudi Arabia somewhere. Maybe not. Maybe not, guys. Let's take a look at something else here that's very, very interesting. All right, let's go actually to the 7summits.com website. And this is about Antarctica, and it's about Mount Vincent, and it talks about it being the tallest mountain, etc. Let me read to you the Antarctica facts, though. Besides the mountain summit, if you go down here to say about right up under the blue right here on your screen, the snowfall in Antarctica is so minimal that the continent has been called the world's coldest desert. The interior receives less than 3 centimeters, in other words, less than 1 inch of precipitation a year, making it the driest continent on Earth. The Antarctic dry valleys in Victoria Land are among the driest places on Earth. Some scientists believe that no rain has fallen there for 2 million years. Astronauts have visited the dry valleys because of their similarity to lunar landscapes. Isn't that interesting? They call it the coldest desert on Earth. Well, maybe Enoch has got something when he said it was a desert. All right? As he called it, there was no water on it and no birds, but it was a desert place. Well, there are no birds. There are no penguins when you get that deep into Antarctica. There's just no life at all. And a terrible thing I saw there, 7 stars like the great burning mountains, and like a spirit questioning me, the angel said, "This is the place of the end of heaven and earth. This is the prison for the stars of heaven and the host of heaven, and the stars which roll over the fire. These are the ones which transgress the commandment of the Lord from the beginning of their rising, because they did not come out at their proper times, and he was angry with them and bound them until the time of consummation of their sin in the year of mystery." And I, Uriel, we go into chapter 19 here, real quick here, just the first verse, said to me, "The spirits of the angels who were promiscuous with women will stand here, and they, assuming many forms, made men unclean, and will lead men astray so that they sacrifice to demons as gods." Now, if you notice, that is a continuation. They're not dead. They're still there. And they do what? They will lead men astray so that they sacrifice to demons as gods. Wasn't that interesting? CERN not long ago, where they sacrificed a young woman. Oh, they claimed it wasn't real, but found out later, according to Russian media, it was real. Russian media even was able to determine which woman it was that had been kidnapped. That was by not just so much the media, it was actually Russian intelligence officers that determined this information, but it was in Russian news, and we shared that with you here on Israeli News Live. So they sacrifice to demons as gods. They will stand there until the great day of judgment, on which they will be judged, so that an end will be made of them. But they still have very much access to men on this earth, and they are leading them astray, and they can they assuming many forms. That's pretty wild. I mean, I've never seen anything like this in my life. And the point is that I make here, when we look in chapter 18, it appears to be, and it could be completely somewhere else different on the earth. All right, I'm just saying this as a conjecture to you to consider this. But it appears to be that Antarctica is that region that he's speaking of. For one, it has to be a place that's burning day and night. That sun is where they can see day and night. It seems to really match up, and that's what's really, really fascinating, in my opinion, there. And again, just like the mountains, if you were to take into consideration the antediluvian destruction that tilted the earth off its axis and put the earth back right on its axis, and then look at the peaks here on the map in behind you here, then you would actually have, just as it describes there in Enoch, 3 to the south and 3 to the east. Three peaks on a 7-summit mountain range, and of course the middle one being the tall.
Well, after that opening video, I hope your interest is piqued. So brothers and sisters and guests, welcome back. As I said a couple of weeks ago, it's a great blessing to be able to minister these great truths week by week, and it's my prayer that every week you go home with another new transformative truth. The truths just keep getting deeper and deeper, and we are now slowly making our way towards the center of the message of the fascinating book, the book of Revelation. Today's question revolves around the 144,000 Israelites, first described in chapter 7, and then making a second appearance at chapter 14, who were taken from the tribes of Israel as a spotless firstfruits group of disciples of Christ. Who are these 144,000 Israelites, exactly 12,000 from each tribe, who carry the seal of God in their foreheads and follow the Lamb of God wherever he goes? It seems that they are, at least, clearly Christian, as they follow the Messiah as the Lamb of God, which is a purely Christian concept. We will look, of course, at whether there is reasonably any chance that the list given could be received literally, given that most of the tribes have long been lost to history. We also look at the significance of the unusual order in which the tribes are listed. We will suggest that the great crowd of witnesses that follow this vision in Revelation 7 are not some other group of believers, but indeed the same group, only now seen non-symbolically, in order to identify the greater Israel of the new covenant. We will also examine the new Melchizedek priesthood associated with this new apocalyptic house of Israel, the links between the 24 elders seated in heaven and the 24 courses of musicians and worshippers who perpetually gave praise in David's tabernacle and then later in the temple, and other links between the old priesthood in Jerusalem and the new priesthood in New Jerusalem, not least the 1,000 years of the Aaronic priesthood and the millennial dominion of the Christian saints. The sealing of the elect in chapter 7 falls within the middle square, or if you prefer cross, of the book's basic structure. At this level, there are opposing visions of the elect and the apostate. Chapter 7 presents a vision of the elect, while chapter 17 opposes it with a vision of the apostate. The two sides in the conflict are identified, and each has their origins from the beginning of time. The saints at one level, in the predeterminations of God, are sealed in the timeless realm of heaven. The apostate, however, are sealed by faith in the earth realm, with allegiance to the beast and the world, as described in Revelation 13. The world of the apostate is summed up in the vision of the beast and great harlot. It is a world system held guilty for the blood of the saints. Across the opposite diagonal of this middle square are chapters 8 and 9 at one corner and chapters 15 and 16 at the other. Chapters 8 and 9 describe the 7 apocalyptic trumpets, with chapter 9 introducing the wrath of God, subsequently outlined in chapters 15 and 16 in terms of the 7 vials of wrath. Armageddon and its aftermath make up the 6th and 7th of these vials. The chapters between 9 and 15, that is, chapters 10 through 14, form the book's innermost structural square, in which the great conflict of the ages is most graphically and mystically laid out, running from the angel's final great commission in chapter 10 to the 2 phases of resurrection at chapter 14, where the earth's harvest is finally reaped. Picking up the discussion about the marriage promises in our last lesson and its associated covenant promises, we now look a little more closely in this lesson at what exactly the seal of the Holy Spirit means and how this relates to the fact the 144,000 are also sealed in their foreheads. So there's a lot to think about, so let's get started. So it's session 48, part 1, the 144,000. Who are they? Here's one of these Dura etchings, the lamb at the top, people waving their palm branches. This is the great crowd of witnesses in Revelation 7. Revelation 7 verses 4 to 8. And I heard the number of the sealed, 144,000, sealed out of every tribe of the sons of Israel. Out of the tribe of Judah, 12,000 sealed. Out of the tribe of Reuben, 12,000. Out of the tribe of Gad, 12,000. Out of the tribe of Asher, 12,000. Out of the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000. Out of the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000. Out of the tribe of Simeon, 12,000. Out of the tribe of Levi, 12,000. Out of the tribe of Issachar, 12,000. Out of the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000. Out of the tribe of Joseph, 12,000. Out of the tribe of Benjamin, 12,000. The 144,000 are sealed by God Himself. The New Testament saints are sealed in the blood of Christ. And we can see there from Ephesians 1, 11 and 14, and also Numbers 6. And both of those ideas are brought into Revelation 3:12. Let's have a look at those passages. It is blood that is so much better than the blood of animals. It is blood that is better than that of any other human being. It is the blood of the virgin born. It is blood, so to speak, that has come down from heaven and is offered back to heaven. The seal represents a firm promise or a firm claim of ownership. As a promise, it is the king's own sworn oath. The New Jerusalem has the names of the 12 tribes on its 12 gates. The sealed ones may enter by its 12 gates. But the city also has the names of the 12 apostles in its foundations. It seems evident that the 144,000 then are the church and are the New Jerusalem. The number 144 has its own special properties. In the Fibonacci series beginning at 1, the progression of terms to 144 is 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, and 144. We know the rule here is that you add each two consecutive digits to produce the next. We notice that the first perfect square is 1 squared, but the next perfect square, 144, is 12 squared. 144 is also the 12th in sequence. The square power on the 12 depicts a divine government and priesthood that is spread across the earth. Now, in the Hebrew text, the words Gan, meaning the Garden of Eden, also has the gematria 144. The 13th or next number in the Fibonacci sequence is 233 by adding 89 and 144. 233 happens to be the gematria of the expression Etz HaChaim, which means the tree of life. And so we see that with the 144 and the 233, we have in gematria form the Garden of Eden and the tree of life. Now 1000 is 10 cubed. The 10 cubed indicates a three-dimensional completeness. The power on the number tends to be the dimensionality of the extent of a thing. So this is a totality that is not just over the earth, but it's also reaching into heaven. So this is a priesthood that is both in heaven and on earth. So we find that we have 144 times 10 cubed. This spiritual Israel has a priesthood that is present both in earth and heaven. The growth of the Fibonacci sum from 1 to 1 to 144 symbolizes perhaps how the gospel message grows and propagates historically until, at the end of the age, both the church and the testimony are perfected. The 144 are sealed in their foreheads. This means their minds belong to Christ. The saints have their consciences sealed. That is, forgiveness has been promised in the blood of Christ. The forehead was also typically where ownership of a bondservant was indicated. We may be sons of God through faith, but we are also bondservants to the priest-king, Jesus Christ. The seal of God corresponds to the name of God that God promised to place upon the heads of his people. It is the name of the saints' Redeemer and Owner. Ephesians 1:13. You also, when you believed, were sealed, and we can read in here, for possession, by the promised Holy Spirit. Numbers 6:27. God speaking to Israel. And so they shall put my name upon the people of Israel, and I will bless them. This was in part a mark of ownership. As the Israelites go forth in the name of their God, the blessing goes with them. The blessing is the success of God's work and his peace on one's family and land. It is the hand of God redirecting and reshaping history. It stands against the curse, which waits to steal away not only the blessing, but even the well-being of the one to whom the blessing should have come. That is, without the blessing of God, success is stolen away. Without the arm of God, the safety of Israel is removed, and forces of chaos can move in upon it. Evil thoughts enter into the minds of its enemies, and God does not speak to his prophets or give instruction. To have the name of God on one's forehead, by contrast, is to have the blessing of God and to live the life of the miraculous. Revelations 3:12. And this then places this particular passage in a better context. The one who conquers, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and I will write on him 3 names, the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, and my own new name. Well, to have 3 such names upon one's head, God, Israel, and Messiah, is to have blessing indeed. These 3 names together indicate the true Jew. And what are we to make of the peculiar order in which the 12 tribes are listed in this passage? The order in which the 12 tribes are listed here is unlike any seen in the Old Testament, making it unlikely that the reference is to literal Old Testament Israel. The names from Gad to Manasseh are linked to the concubines of Rachel and Leah. The names after that are the children of Leah and then Rachel. So it goes from concubines first to natural wives second. Now the order of honor is almost entirely reversed, therefore, in this list. And how would we rationalize that? Well, Judah received the birthright privilege that was originally Reuben's. And this would explain why Judah has now superseded Reuben in the list. The lot of Dan has disappeared and has been given to Manasseh. Dan's omission may be because this was the only tribe not to take its inheritance while Joshua lived. Dan took its allotted land only 400 years later and had to do so through a slaughter carried out in a time of peace. Judges 18:1 and verse 27 also. The Danites had also hired a pagan priest to run their religious affairs and had as a consequence become idolatrous. Judges 18:30. The tribe of Dan lived in the region of Bashan, where the serpent was worshipped and where Og the giant had ruled. Now Joseph, who is not usually listed, now takes the place of Ephraim. Levi now joins the list, while in the Old Testament he is usually omitted. And so we see there are quite a few variations. Normally, Levi would not receive a tribal land allotment, as Levi's peculiar task was to manage the temple and its sacrifices and to settle legal questions. They were not like the other tribes, herders of animals or farmers. So Levi's inclusion as a regular tribe in Revelation 7 may then indicate that their role as priests ended with the arrival of the new covenant. This Revelation 7 ordering does, however, represent the 12 tribes as grouped according to the respective wives of Jacob. For instance, Judah to Zebulun are the children of Leah. Joseph and Benjamin are Rachel's offspring. Gad and Asher are from Leah's concubines. Naphtali and Dan, although now replaced by Manasseh, are from Rachel's concubine. And so if we move the first four names to the end of the list, we arrive at the following arrangement. And by the way, this choosing of concubines first seems to speak of the choosing of the one that isn't naturally the chosen one, but nevertheless now becomes the chosen one. There's a sign here of divine election, perhaps a symbol of it in the way these tribes are listed. In fact, Leah was also not the favored wife, Rachel was, but Leah's children become the preeminent ones. But if we move the first four names to the end of the list, we arrive at the following arrangement. We have the children of Leah first, and they are Judah, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Issachar. And then we have the children of Rachel, Zebulun, and Joseph, Joseph replacing Ephraim. Then we have the children of Leah's concubine, which are Benjamin, Gad, and Asher. And then the children of Rachel's concubine, Naphtali and Manasseh, who replaces Dan. While Rachel may have been Jacob's favored wife, it was Leah's children who had the preeminence over those of Rachel, and the same went for the children of the concubines. And so this seems to be a picture of divine election. Now, if we do not make this rearrangement, if we don't move those four tribes from the top to the bottom, and leave the bottom four at the top, the symbol of divine election, if anything, is even stronger. Not only is it Leah ahead of Rachel, but it's also now concubines ahead of wives. God has really chosen the lowly first and the entitled last. In Christ, he has also chosen the lowly Gentile ahead of the entitled Jew. The Israel depicted in this vision is therefore the Israel that has been chosen and called out from the despised nations, the Gentile version of Israel, the church. So I've assumed the 144,000 should be understood symbolically. But is there a possibility that the 144,000 could be taken literally? Well, let's consider that for a moment. The main problem for literality is that 10 of these 12 tribes have long been lost to history. Not even the remnant of a single tribe is recorded as having returned from Assyrian captivity. The few stragglers that did make it back were simply absorbed into Judah, surrendering any earlier tribal identity. And with loss of tribal identity, subsequent intermarriage with other people groups would have eradicated their original identities. Dispensationalists teach that once all of the Gentile Christians have been raptured away, God will supernaturally reveal to the 10 lost tribes both who they really are and that Christ is their Messiah. They surmise that this will lead to their instantaneous conversion. Combined with 24,000 converts from the remaining 2 tribes, these instantly converted Israelites will make up the 144,000 Israelites of this text. They are then tasked with evangelizing the world with the gospel under the regime of the Antichrist. These zealous Israelites will then succeed in bringing millions to Christ. Well, such is the dispensationalist argument. And while this scenario is not strictly impossible, it does sound highly unlikely to me, and a literal interpretation therefore also seems highly unlikely for this passage. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses are among those who think that these 144,000 are literal saints, and that they are not a Jewish group, but an elect apostolic group among the Christian saints who have a special status with God. The elite saints who make up this heavenly ruling class are identified from within. That is, they know within themselves whether they are of the 144,000 or not. These are the saints who will receive the special right to rule with Christ in the millennium. This is the Jehovah's Witness point of view. And again, this is not impossible, but it is, I believe, highly unlikely. The British Israel movement attempts to locate the 10 lost tribes in the form of the modern European nations, plus England and the United States. Well, this may sound crazy, but there is, in fact, a relatively strong case for this. The problem is there is just some historical, there's a lack of historical records to tie it together in a documented fashion. But the case is made in part from the alphabetic systems, the tribal tartans, and even the symbols of heraldry in Europe, the ancient symbols. There are certain linguistic connections that are also made, but some are almost too simple to be plausible. An example might be, for instance, the identification of Saxons as Isaac's sons. Another example would be the claim that the common prefix dun, found all over Scotland, and generally translated to mean hill, arises from the arrival of the tribe of Dan in that land. Certain family connections are also far too convenient, such as Joseph of Arimathea being a rich tin merchant from Cornwall, but also the uncle of Jesus, who brought Jesus to England in his childhood to spend time at Glastonbury and to enchant the place with his magical presence. This legend, of course, is captured in the miraculous character of the Glastonbury legends. It was also at Glastonbury that the giant bones of King Arthur were located, and his choice to be buried there may in part have arisen from the Christian fame associated with the place. Histories in Europe are very sparse before 500 AD, and before about 850 AD in the British Isles, and most of the early history is legendary and received only by word of mouth. Luckily, missionaries also wrote accounts of their lives in Europe, and we learn a lot about the countries in the earliest centuries from these accounts. Countries like Greece and Rome carried better histories, and a lot was written about countries that they had conquered. Now, many of these records are now in the hands of the Vatican, and the Vatican is probably the best repository of all when it comes to early European history. And it also holds many artifacts and religious relics from across Europe and from very early times. Those interested in the theories of migration and settlement presented by the British Israel movement can review the publications of the British Israel World Federation, which is in fact still operating. A search online will also quickly lead you to lists of European countries and the tribes they believe migrated to those countries. The Mormon Church, with its great databank, traces the scattering of Israel's 10 lost tribes using the names of ancient people groups around the world. They believe this is probably quite a good way to locate them. However, there are many indications that at least some of the lost 10 tribes were scattered across the continents as intact tribal fragments. But they didn't all go to Europe. Nevertheless, the tribes have largely lost their integrity with time, even under this analysis, and could still be considered to be lost because of intermarriage with subsequent migrants. As soon as a people group loses interest in maintaining its unique identity, this usually happens within only a generation or two, and the history is lost and forgotten by the new generations of children. However, there is at least a little I can say about where some of these tribes might still be located in the present day. As some of you will know, my wife is from Pakistan. Pakistan was part of India until 1947, and along its borders, modern Pakistan has populations that are predominantly Persian, Chinese, and Patani. I'm speaking here of the northern borders. The Pathan villages straddle the line between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and this is an area where several historical armies have camped on the way to one conquest or another. Attila the Hun stopped there and left behind warriors who for a time were local rulers called Naran. The troops of Alexander the Great did the same on their way to conquering the Indus. Many of his soldiers chose to stay behind and cohabit with local girls. The girls in that area were known for their good looks. The genetic traits of those armies can still be identified. The standard brown eyes of the Indian have given place to blue and green eyes, and the skin color in the area is a few shades paler than in more southern regions. But there are also people living there who have features like this from a time before the soldiers, and the source of this appears to have been a migration from Mesopotamia a few centuries earlier still. This might have been the tribes of Israel. Now, in Pakistan today, one can visit the village of Murree, high up above Islamabad, in the mountains flanking Kashmir. Murree is so named because it is said to hold the grave of Mary, the mother of Jesus, who Catholic tradition otherwise says was buried in Ephesus. Not far to the south, in the northeastern corner of India, is a group of towns, all named after Israelite towns from the time of the judges and kings. Local stories tell of migrants who came from the Holy Land and settled there, apparently unable to return to their own land. It seems quite possible that these Israelites were assigned to northern India by one of the Assyrian kings between It seems quite possible that these Israelites were assigned to northern India by one of the Assyrian kings between Tiglath-Pileser III and Ashurbanipal, as the Assyrians were notable for relocating captives from one land into the villages of another. Because Israelites were living in exile in these regions, Jews would seek them out in times of trouble, as a place of refuge. And this is possibly why Mary was on her way to northern India when she died. Or perhaps she just chose to live in the mountains of Pakistan. While little remains in the rest of Pakistan that could be called Israelite, the Patani villages of Afghanistan have far more to say. In fact, the first Patani king was called Mir Hagola, meaning light of the exile, and his town was named Toramana, meaning, apparently, believers in the Torah, or the Torah is truth. People groups there have names like the Gadun, Shimwani, Zavala, Efridi, Rabbani, and Levani, which do not seem very dissimilar really to the biblical tribe names Gad compared to Gadun, Simeon compared to Shimwani, Zebulon compared to Zavala, Ephraim compared to Efridi, Reuben compared to Rabbani, and Levi compared to Levani. Indeed, the very name Afghanistan comes from the ancestor Afghan, who also happens to be the name of one of King Saul's sons. The Patani, like the Israelites, built cities of refuge, and even in their Muslim madrasa, the children rock back and forth, just like the Jews reciting the Torah. Some groups still even sacrifice animals as sin offerings, and some significantly light Sabbath candles on Friday night. And there are three places in which very ancient Hebrew inscriptions, Paleo Hebrew actually, are found on flat rocks, commemorating the arrival of the Israelites. And one of these is at Kandahar. Even under Islam, the Patani people maintain that their origins are from northern Israel. And stories about the 10 scattered tribes can be found in at least 5 places scattered loosely around modern Peshawar and westward along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. An old oral history names the 5 places as the mountains of the Medes, along the river Gozen, in the Halar province, in Harar province, and in the Havua Pass. Now these are all quite militant areas in the modern day. The mountains of the Medes is modern Kurdistan. The city of Harar is probably the modern city of Herat in Afghanistan. The modern river Ghazna appears to be the river Gozen. The pass of Havua is the modern border city of Peshawar, which is also where the Khyber Pass gets its name. The modern province of Halar still has its ancestral name. As far as the identity of the Jews goes, and we are speaking now of the 2 tribes that have not been lost, it might be thought to be more intact. But the fact is that most of those Jews scattered to the nations by the Romans have not returned. The bulk of those who did return to Israel in the modern day are the descendants of converted peoples. Many native Jews fled to southern Arabia and Yemen after the Roman purge of 135 AD, and they joined in the quest for Yemenite gold, and a truer Jewish bloodline is likely to be found if one looks there in Yemen. Now many Jews also became slaves in Rome after 70 AD, where in time they started banks and guilds, according to the historians, and many of these were later dismantled after Constantine's conversion. But it turns out that some of the most important Middle Eastern sages were Romans who had converted to Judaism. And these are the sages that the Jews follow in the Middle Ages. However, Rome also sold many of the Jews into African slavery. The DNA evidence, which doesn't really lie, backs up a claim that most of the modern Jews in Israel and the United States are genetically identical to the Khazarian Jews, who were part of a conglomerate of Turkic peoples living in a Greater Turkey in Roman times that included the Crimea and Caucasus, and some of whom at some stage emigrated across Europe towards southern Germany and France. Of course, there were also some communities of converted Jews in Asia Minor, and these also absorbed some of those Jews who fled Israel, and in time the gene pools of the Jews and these converted peoples became mixed. DNA testing shows a marker for the Kohanim, the priests in the people of Lemba, South Africa, and this confirms a long-standing claim that many Jews actually fled to Africa and continued their religion there. The 40 million Igbo in Nigeria, who are now mainly Christian, also show some of the distinctly Israelite genes. Many American slaves subsequently came from this region, and lately Christian groups have come up among African American peoples, where they teach that they are the real bloodline of Israel in the world today. The Khazarian kingdom in Turkey began to collapse after 1000 AD, and many of the families that fled there earlier now returned to Israel. Many of these returnees adopted the religion of the Samaritans, as it was the strongest Jewish religion in the land at the time, before a series of strong rabbinical leaders also returned to Israel and took up lodgings in and around Safa, a town within view of Jerusalem. These rabbis of the Middle Ages helped to move Jewish practices and beliefs back closer to their first form. Others left Turkey and went in directions other than due south to Israel, and Jews are now seen returning to Israel from places as diverse as Greece, Iran, and Japan. Others went halfway home to Israel and chose to live in Sidon and Syria. In the modern day, Jews are making aliyah, that is, return, from a variety of countries, especially from Russia and France. But many also came from Africa, where converts adopted Jewish practices and became practicing Jews. The descendants of these African converts eventually married with the Jewish arrivals, and again there was a mixing of the genes. The Jews were not confined to only one area in Africa either. Jewish Africans are returning to Israel today from Ethiopia, Somalia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Sao Tome, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Senegal, Cameroon, Mali, Uganda, Ghana, Nigeria, and a few other areas. And of course, Arabian Yemen also holds many who still carry the genes of distant Jewish mothers. Theodore Herzl first saw anti-Semitism in France during the Dreyfus Affair. Now, Dreyfus was a French or German Jew in France, and when he had all his medals stripped from him publicly for some supposed crime, the whole country began chanting, "Down with the Jews, down with the Jews." The Kishikev massacre in 1903, where Orthodox Christians attacked and killed Jews, convinced Theodor Herzl that anti-Semitism was still as alive in Russia as it was in France and Germany, and that the Jews really needed a homeland for their long-term safety and survival. So Herzl approached the British and asked for a protectorate in the Mideast for the Russian Jews, but he got a no. The Brits did suggest Uganda, however, but the Zionist Council rejected Uganda. Now, Theodor Herzl was a Catholic Jew, and therefore was well integrated into Europe already. And like so many Austrian Jews, they were so wealthy and so well established and comfortable in the European situations that they didn't support Herzl's vision of returning to the Palestine desert. They also feared that all their money would be sought by the new state for nation building. Anyway, back to our 144,000, who we still believe are the church, only in a symbolic representation. James 1:1 refers to the 12, not 10 tribes scattered among the nations, but it seems clear he is speaking figuratively of all saints, as the new Israel scattered among the nations. The great crowd of saints from every nation, which is the next division in Revelation 7, therefore appears to be the real, non-symbolic view of the same group of people as formed the elect 144,000. Here it may well be Scripture is interpreting Scripture, with the latter part of chapter 7 interpreting the former part. Here, as is the case with the more difficult to understand visions of Daniel, angels give an immediate explanation of the symbol. And if that's the case, we can understand that the great crowd of witnesses from all nations is that 144,000, and they are a Christian elect. And so with that thought, we leave you today. We'll pick it up again next week to continue this discussion about the 144,000. Until then, wish you have a great week. Thanks for coming again tonight. God be with you, and be well. Bye-bye.